All right, let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you again for having me on the Salesforce Apex Hours. So I'm Joey Chan. I'm here to talk about Salesforce Workbench. So just to introduce myself, I am a Salesforce MVP. I'm also the founder and technical architect of Cloud Jedi Solutions. I'm the #1 rated developer on the App Exchange. Been with the Salesforce ecosystem for around 12 years now. I'm also the community group leader in the Philippines and also the organizer of Philippines Dreamin' and Salesforce MVP series. So what is it? What is Salesforce Workbench? So it's basically a collection of different tools that allows users to interact with the Salesforce API. So who is it for? So it's actually geared towards admins, developers, consultants, or any other persons that actually work with the Salesforce instance. So some of the features that it has is basically data management capabilities similar to data loader. It also has metadata deployment and retrieval capabilities, allowing users to execute anonymous Apex, REST API Explorer, so dealing with the standard Salesforce REST API or any Apex REST web services that you may create. It also allows you to basically set passwords on behalf of different users. And lastly, it also has some metadata explorer capabilities. So some of the APIs that it supports is actually the partner API, the bulk, the REST API, streaming, metadata, and Apex. So without further ado, we'll go through the demo then. So I'm currently logged into a dev org. So how can we actually go to the Workbench? As mentioned, it's actually a web-based tool. So we can simply search for Salesforce Workbench. And just take note of the URL. It's actually workbench.developerforce.com. From here, you can click on it. It allows you to log into either a production or a sandbox. So in this case, I'm on the developer edition account. So just click on production and then log in with Salesforce. This is basically the landing page of the Workbench tool. So from here, within the info, it actually allows you to see different metadata information. So let's say if you want to look at the standard object name account, from here, you can see quite a number of different attributes, whether it's custom or not, is it creatable? And you can also take a look at different fields. Let's say in this case, we have a custom field name active. So it's actually a pick list. So in this case, you have the pick list value of yes or no. And then down below, let's see. Let's close the fields. You can also look at child relationships. So from here, you can actually see all of the different object relationships to the account. This is actually useful for cases when you need to build SOQL queries with related objects. So now we have this metadata types. So what's actually a good use case for admins for this? So let's say you're in Salesforce and you have a process builder and then something goes wrong. For some reason, let's say you're looking at a process and seems like somebody else actually made some changes there. Because if you were to look at the last modified, it was just recently modified. And then question is, how do you know who made the changes? So from here, there's actually no way for you to see who actually made the changes, right? The only thing that you can see is when it was last modified. One way you could see that is actually by going to the Workbench and looking at the metadata. So the way you could do that is actually by going to the flow definition, search for flow definition, And then from here, looking at the name, it's actually contact address updates, right? So from here, you can open contact address updates and be able to see who last modified that specific process. So one thing to take notice that we actually have three components here, but we actually only have two processes, test and contact address updates, right? So there's actually a third one named new lead. The reason why we have that is actually because we have a flow. So basically in the back end, both flows and process builder is actually using the same metadata type, which is the flow definition. So this is the flow that we have as a test. Take note, there's actually quite a lot more information here about the metadata. So I suggest taking a look at these just to see what's there to explore. And it's always good to take a look at these and just to see what information you can find from the metadata API. And then from here, you could also find some session information. So the URL, the endpoint, the profile ID, Salesforce ID, the user ID, the currently logged in user. No. All right, next one for the queries. This is how you could actually execute SOQL queries. So in this case, you could actually, for example, control click on multiple different fields and allow the app to actually build the query for you. From here, you can then click on query. One trick that I actually use a lot is something that a lot of developers from other platform use, is something that's called select asterisk. So it's actually especially good for debugging purposes. So what you could do is basically something that allows you to get all of the fields within that specific object. So from here, we can actually do that by simply Control A. That will then select all of the fields. But take note, there's actually a pop-up here. Choosing count with other fields will result in a malformed query. So all you have to do is click on OK. And then make sure you go to the top. While still holding the control, make sure to unselect this count. Notice it actually populated all of the fields here. And then you can simply query and see all of the fields here. So it can be quite long, of course, because we actually selected all of the fields, but something to consider here, let's say if you want to get all of the fields. From here, you could also execute an async SOQL query. It's something that we don't usually use. But from here, you could also do a search, SOSL search. So let's say if I'm looking for the word test, it automatically creates the SOSL search for you, right? So you can simply click on search, and it will actually give you quite a lot of information in terms of the different objects that can support. So we have the word applicant. For example, we have the applicant object, we have the contact object. You also have an Apex class with the word test, email message, expense, folder. So this can actually be quite useful. Let's say if you're searching for a certain text or a field, right? So from here, for those that are using the streaming API, this is something that you can actually use to subscribe to a push topic for you to see the data coming in. So we won't be testing that. So here we have the data tab. What does it do? It's actually similar to data loader. What it allows you to do is basically insert, update, insert, delete, undelete, or purge data. So as an example, let's just go to a SOQL query. Let's select ID, first name, last name, email from contact. So from here, we have this list, right? Let's just download it as a CSV file. All you have to do is click on bulk CSV. and then query it. And then what we'll do after is actually make some changes to this using Excel. And then using the same tool, actually upload it back to Salesforce. So let's just use two fields, two records here. I'll take out the others. So let's say Workbench demo test. apexhours.com. All I have to do is save it. All right. And then from here, remember, we have this capability to update, right? So all we have to do is select the object type, in this case, contact. And we have the option of selecting a single record or from a file. In this case, we have a CSV file, right? So let's just select this file and then next. Notice we have the fields automatically mapped. The reason for that is because the API name of the fields is actually matching up with the ones on the contact. So the app automatically maps it for you. So from here, all you have to do is click on Map Fields. And then there's this question about processing records asynchronously using the API. In this case, we only have 2 records, so we won't be using that. You can confirm update. So notice it's successful. From here, you have an option of viewing in Salesforce. Let's open these two. And then let's just quickly check. So notice the email address already got updated here. And then same thing with here. All right. So just be aware that you have capabilities for upserting records. So whether deleting, undeleting, or purging. Purging is basically deleting it from the cycle bin. So from here, for the migration tab, we actually have the capability of deploying or retrieving using the metadata API. In this specific case, we won't be showing it in the demo, but basically, it allows you to upload a zip file containing the metadata that you want to push to the instance. And there's some additional settings that you can use, rollback on error, test level, things to run, right? And same thing with retrieve. You could actually provide it with a package.xml, tell it what files you want to retrieve, and then it will give you the metadata that you need. From here, we also have the REST Explorer. So it's actually a way to test out the Salesforce REST API. So notice we have this one. This is actually now the recommended way to test the Salesforce API. Ideally, you should be using Postman, but let's say if you're in an environment where then you could not install it or things like that, you could actually also start using this one for the meantime. So from here, as soon as we execute, we can actually see all of the different REST API endpoints that we can play around with, right? So whether it's tooling, you could see a lot of the queries, information. So in this case, it's actually geared towards developers. So let's say whether it's actually using the Salesforce REST API, or let's say if you have your own Apex web service, this is actually something that you could use to test it out. You could post the data. This is where you could send a request, serve it, send it all. All right. And then the next one is called Apex Execute. So this is where you could actually execute anonymous blocks. So let's say in this case, let me just do a quick debug. So let's say if you need to test out some Apex or just do a trial and see the debug logs and executing that is something that you could use. You could also change the logging level to finest and see more information about the code that you're running. From here, this is where it can be interesting. So not a lot of people actually know that you can actually set somebody's password. Take note that this is actually not a best practice. So it's something that we normally don't recommend because admins are not supposed to be aware of the password of the different users, right? So let's say, let's go to Salesforce and then pick a specific user. From here, we have a user named Michelle. And then we have this specific ID. So Salesforce ID for the user starts with 005. So this is what we will be using in order to set the password for the specific user. For the password, I'll actually generate a new one. Date. And then I'll also need to set it here and then change the password to set it. Actually, I just tried it earlier, but you could try it out. Let's see. Let me try a different user. Let's say this one. Let's see. I'll try to set this one instead. So I'll use password. Change the password here. So notice I was able to successfully set the password, right? So take note, there are, of course, password policies within Salesforce, like it has to be at least eight characters and things like those, depending on your org. It actually also still follows that. So let's say if you are trying to use an insecure password, it will tell you and not allow you to change the password. All right. From here, we also have options of looking at the bulk API job status. So let's say you're trying to upload a large number of data. Ideally, you should be using the bulk API. In this specific case, where we don't have an ID, so we won't be able to get the status. And then same thing with the metadata API. Let's say if we're trying to deploy or retrieve something using this deploy or retrieve function. This is where you could actually use it to see the status. All right. Some additional settings in the backend that you could actually explore. So things like allowing users to view records in Salesforce, basically a link to the ID. So some of the useful things here that you'd want to check is, let's say, being able to set your own time zone and setting the date formatting. Something to consider too is, for example, inserting null values. Let's say if you need to clear up the value on certain fields whenever you're uploading it using data loader or using the data management, make sure you're actually ticking this box so that it will clear up the values in Salesforce. And then things like, do you want it to trigger auto response emails? One thing that you want to tick, this is actually not checked by default, allows SOQL parent relationship queries. So let me save this just to give you a quick demo on what it does. So let me turn it off. And then under queries, let's say we have this query of getting first name, last name, email, right? What if we also want the account name? You could do a query, but it will tell you that parent relationship queries are disabled in Workbench. So in order to fix this, all you have to do is go to the settings, make sure this is checked, and then apply. And then as soon as we query it again, it will actually show us the data that we're looking for. So these are the accounts that we have. All right. So there's actually other useful information here in terms of the settings. So make sure to check it out. And yeah, that's about it. So thank you again for having me. So make sure to follow us on Twitter, on the website, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. So Salesforce Apex Hours or Apex Hours. All right. And thank you for having me again and have a good day.